I'm going to try and fix the lighting a little bit here, so bear with me, but let me know that you can see me and let me know that you can hear me. That's better. It's much better. Okay. Okay, someone says they can see me. Someone says they can hear me. I've got people watching. Excellent. Hello, hello. Okay. Awesome. So that tells me that Facebook is working. Is anyone joining us from YouTube? All right. People are here. It's 5:32. We're talking about progressing your training. So when to change something, when to move on from something, when it's done, those things. So let's find out. Let's dig into how we measure success and make changes to our training sessions so that we keep going. I'm just going to grab the YouTube link in case anyone wants it. And then we'll get started. It appears to now be going to both of my YouTube pages. That's funny. Okay. Make sure I don't exit out of the thing. Excellent. All right. So progressing your training. I'm going to start by saying that every training session you do should leave you further along than when you started. And I know that sounds like duh, Megan, but I don't think we talk about it enough that there, and it goes back to that planning piece of knowing what you're going to train and knowing how you're going to break it down to be able to do those things. But if you are training and not seeing progress, like if you did not progress in that session, something isn't working. And we can unpack so many things about what might not be working. So, bear with me if time allows. But every session should show improvement. And we are going to talk about how we can look for improvement and how we can measure success. But let's start there. That if your first rep, if you were not able to progress through to your last rep, or if you didn't see improvement, especially when you're trying to acquire a new behavior, something's wrong. Okay. So if you're not seeing changes from the previous session to the next session, or even within the first rep to the last rep, then let's take a look at, are you lumping? Did you put too many components of the behavior together in one training session? So did you try and take on more than you could reasonably expect to teach in one session? Okay. An example might be that I'm thinking of something Torch is learning right now. So like going around the cone, one thing that could very easily be lumped is how much distance I take from the cone. Because in particular, I like to mark and reinforce for movement towards the cone, and then reward for the rest of the cone wrap. So I might mark and reward I might mark just as he's like looking and turning his head towards the cone. And then as the reward strategy would be to lure him around the rest of the cone and feed him at my side. So it would be lumping for me to add distance to that behavior before he's going around the cone on his own. So if I start to add distance and then I start to see that he's no longer moving towards the cone, so I don't see progress within that session, am I lumping? So I need to look at, did I increase the criteria of two things at the same time? And that particular example would be my distance away from the cone and how much of the cone he has to go around before I mark. So if I increase both of those at the same time, that's lumping. And that would for sure decrease his success rate and make it look like we weren't progressing in that session. Okay, so we're checking for lumping. And then the other thing is to check on your loops, right? Because sometimes we're not progressing because there's something going on in between the repetitions. Maybe the dog is doing the behavior just fine every single time, but the training isn't clean. So the time lost between collecting reinforcement and starting the rep again, maybe the dog is getting distracted, which is kind of keeping him from learning what you're expecting him to learn. A good example of this is Torch is on the brain because he gets trained like 100 times a day. But a good example is if I'm training with Torch and Graham walks in the house, it interrupts the loop right now. He says, wait, what was that? He doesn't have enough history of either of those things. One, training with me, or two, Graham coming in the house. He doesn't have enough history to tune it out, right? Like all my other dogs, they're like, yeah, whatever. Graham comes in the house all the time and they don't react if I am training, but he doesn't have that skill yet. So he will react in the moment, go, oh, it's Graham. And then he has to make a choice. Do I run over and say hi to Graham or do I get back to work? But even if we continued the session as if it never happened, it did happen. The loop was broken. And therefore that might keep him from progressing in that session. Okay. So those are kind of those are the two top things that I would think of if your sessions are not progressing either within the session or from one session to the next. I'm afraid that you are either lumping or your loops are cracked and need some mending. Okay, does that make sense? There's just a tiny bit of a delay from Facebook to restream. So I'm going to give you guys a second. Okay. And then if you are seeing progress, either from session to session or within that session, so you're seeing constant improvement. So one, good job. You're doing a good job of splitting things and approximating things into small pieces. And your loops are probably pretty good and your learner is probably having a good time, right? So if you are seeing progress, you need to change one thing for the next session. It is kind of my goal to not ever repeat the exact same session twice. Okay. The video is freezing, but the voice keeps going, so everything's fine. Excellent. Let me know if that changes, because I can swap platforms if needed. So you always want to be changing something about the session. Doesn't have to be a big change. In fact, it should be such a small change that your learner doesn't notice, because then you'll keep progressing. If the change too big, you'll probably fall back into that first category we talked about of not progressing. But you do want it to be changing, because if you repeat the exact same session over and over and over again, that becomes the behavior. So especially when we're acquiring new behaviors and things that we're making approximations towards that are going to be changing, we need to change them fairly rapidly. So if you've taken any of my obstacle skills classes, so there's been 2, Weave, Pulls, and Teeter. My goal is to break it down so small that every single session can be 10 or 12 cookies, couple of minutes maximum, and boom, you're on to the next step, the very next session. There is no need to repeat it. Or if there is a need to repeat it, there's something that needs to be fixed about it. So you almost always want to be changing something, whether you're getting the results that you want or not. Because if you're not getting the results, you need to change something, and like splitting it down, changing your reinforcement strategy, whatever. And if you are getting good progress, you want to be changing something to continue that good progress. Okay. Things that you're going to change. Maybe you just go to a different room. Again, Torch is going to be the example of the night, because anything that I start training in the living room, then the next time I train that skill, I'm going to train it in the kitchen. And then the next time I train that skill, I'm going to train it here in my office. So that it's going to be the number one thing that I change right now. Okay. The other thing that I might change is if it's a behavior that it fits, right? You would change the duration. So that's like another thing that I've been slowly increasing on some of his behaviors, like down and eye contact and stationing. Each session, I ask for just a tiny bit more duration, and I ping pong back between longer amounts of duration and shorter amounts of duration, but that's the variable I'm playing with, is duration. Okay. Distance, just like I was talking about with the cone. Once I've got a nice cone wrap, I can start adding distance. So then I'm not going to say ever, because ever and always don't exist, but I'm trying really hard to not start with my toes touching the cone anymore. Once he progresses and shows me that he can go around the cone when I'm standing 6 inches from the cone, that's my new starting point, is 6 inches from the cone. And having worked with a lot of clients, I think this is the number one thing that gets messed up, is when we start again, we start at the very beginning. And we've talked about this in the past about that your easy behavior, your dog's easiest version of the behavior continues to move. So now if I stood with my toes touching the cone, he would do it, but it would be so easy that it's not worth asking him. But if I start now 4 inches from the cone, that's an adequate question for him. He knows the answer, but it does make him think. So then I can, and so if I'm working on distance, then the repetitions might be 4 inches away, 5 inches away, 6 inches away, 4 inches away, 4 inches away, 7 inches away. And that might be my training session. But I ended 7 inches from the cone. So that means my starting point next time is probably 5 or 6 inches from the cone. Maybe not exactly where I left off, but certainly not all the way back at 0, because then if I keep doing the same amount of reps, I'm either going to never progress past 6 or 7 inches, or I'm going to be I'm going to be likely to jump back in bigger increments. Does that make sense? Because if I start back at 0 every single time, I'm going to want to go 0, 6 inches, 12 inches, 18 inches. And then I'm going to see more failure. Does that make sense? I kind of got off on a how to increase distance tangent, but I think it was relevant. Okay. Getting answers. Someone says I make sense, so we're all good. I am going to pull up the comments. Yes, it does happen a lot with weaves. We start over every session, and then we try to make too big of leaps. So you always have to be remember. So it also goes back to record keeping, right? Because remember, like, just that one thing, write down write down where you ended the previous session. So again, Torch, he's training so frequently right now. I'm not taking detailed notes on every session I do with him, but I'm keeping just tiny little notes on him right now. And I'm trying to film as much as I can so I can watch the video if I forget. But I might just write down, I'll write down cone, 6 inches. That's where I was when I ended, so that when I go back to do the cone again, if I don't remember that, I can look at my notes, say, okay, I ended at 6 inches last time. I'm going to start at 4 inches this time and see how far we get. So there should always be something changing from one session to the next. Okay. You can also add in other distractions. So that's something else that I'm playing with. Can you do your nose touches with another dog in the room, behind the gate, things like that? Can you do your nose touches with Graham on the couch? Can you do your nose touches with your favorite toy on the ground that you've just been playing with? So you add in these little distractions as well. You can change the reward delivery. There are so many things that you can change so that you're layering in that kind of that novelty, that if your dog kind of goes with the flow of training from day one, competing is also going to be a lot easier, because they're like, oh yeah, this changes all the time, it's fine. Too sterile of an environment and repeating the exact same session over and over again is problematic. I'm going to grab this question. I have a teeter problem. My 8-inch dog has figured out where the fulcrum is and stops there. It takes him a good 6 seconds for the teeter to go down before he will run to the end. So I've been holding the end of the teeter up and asking him to target the end. He has learned that targeting is fun, and he is eager to run up the teeter if he knows I'm holding it. What is the step I need to get from holding the teeter, having him write it down and enjoy it? So it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I would actually recommend you not holding it up, because that's becoming cue for him, is that you're standing at the end holding it up. So that's problem 1. And problem 2 is they don't know, he's not learning how to control the movement. He's learning you control the movement, and that can actually be a little bit scarier. So I recommend using an adjustable teeter that can be low and only working on the down in, only giving him access to the down in and building value for it that way. But it's a little bit outside the scope of this talk. But feel free to post that in the in the group in general, and I'm sure you'll get lots of help there as well. Okay, So we know that every session should show improvement. How are we measuring success? So you can tell me how you are currently measuring success in the comments, and I'm going to talk about a few ways that I measure success. Okay? Because we need a way to measure success so we know if there was enough improvement to move to the next step, right? Your rate of reinforcement is one. And I kind of want to go there, but I'm not sure. But like there's this, I don't know, it's like training advice that's as old as I am, probably older, but it says that 80% success rate is enough. And I kind of want to unpack that because because we can be better than that. 80% success rate is not the only thing I want to measure. Okay? Because let's take Torch, for example, as we will be all night. And all of his training sessions are like 10 cookies or less. Like I put 10 cookies in my hand and I'll sit down and do one thing for those 10 cookies. And then I might do like 5 or 6 things when he's like engaged and wants to train with me. But I'm not doing nose touches for 60 cookies. Okay? If he's going to get 60 cookies, he's going to get 6 different skills. Or really, if I'm doing 6, he's getting more like 6 cookies per thing. So everything he does is 6 to 10 cookies. So if I sit down to do nose touches, he's going to get all 6 of those cookies before I stop doing nose touches. So if he got all 6 cookies, did he have 100% success rate? It means he touched my hand 6 times. Should I move on? Should I make it harder? I don't. Maybe, but not necessarily. Because we need to go back to what might cause us to not progress. I'm going to look at the quality of his loops. So let's also keep in mind that if he touches my hand, he's going to get a cookie, and he's going to come back and he touches my hand, and he's going to get another cookie. If when he comes back, he looks around and doesn't immediately touch my hand, I remove the target and I reset. So then that was a failure, but he still got the cookie, right? So I have to be looking at the whole picture to know if he's had a high enough of rate of reinforcement for that particular behavior. Because if I just go off of, well, he got all of his cookies, I didn't withhold any cookies, then it could be telling you the wrong story. Okay. I'm also going to, so really, really, really paying attention to the quality of your loops, because that is going to be a bigger picture, probably a better picture of your behavior, not just did he touch your hand 6 times. Success is higher level of fluency in any direction, complicated entry, handling, higher distraction, with the dog still excited for more. We can, and yeah, I'm okay with that. That's a very good definition of success. And then I'm assuming that this person is replying to themselves, that you're happy to hear me say that we can do better than 80%. We can do so much better than 80%. In fact, I would like as many sessions as possible that are 100%, because we don't need dogs to fail to learn. You don't need to fail to learn. If you've taken any of my handling classes recently, you know that I don't want you to fail. I want it to be that you have the skills were split so finely that you were given the tools you need to solve every puzzle that you are given. You don't need failure to learn. You don't need to learn the wrong way to be able to know the right way. So if you're splitting your sessions finely enough, you should be able to build on nearly 100% over and over and over and over again. There should be so few failures that the dog only has ever rehearsed what you want. You have only ever rehearsed what you want. Okay. Okay, so we can look at the rate of reinforcement if you have the video and can say he got reinforced this many times, but the behavior was presented to him this many times. Does that make sense? So you really do have to have a video if you're going to use rate of reinforcement as a measure of success. Okay? We can also look at the quality of the behavior, and this does get a little bit tricky, and it does get to be individual and a little bit subjective, and you get to be subjective with your own training and your own dog because it's your life, your agility dog. So whereas someone might be really, really happy with behavior that your dog is doing, if this person had that dog, they wouldn't be happy with that, either because it wasn't fast enough, it didn't look confident enough, or it didn't look enthusiastic enough. You can see how when we're using quality of the behavior as the measure of success, it has to be individual, completely subjective, and you make the parameters. Because if I say to you, I want the dog to be a little bit faster before moving on, in your head, you might be thrilled with your dog's speed, and you might not be looking for any more speed, so you're ready to move on. Whereas I might stay at that level until I see more speed from my own dog. Does that make sense? So you can use speed, confidence, enthusiasm as measures of success, but you have to be really, really clear with what you're looking for. And if you can define it. So when I'm talking about confident, I'm looking at the dog's body language. Is the dog, so this is a one with the teeter, and I just finished teaching my teeter class. If the dog maintained a steady pace across the board, that's confident to me. But if the dog started off fast and then slowed down as they kind of got to the moving part, that's not confident. So I can articulate what I'm looking for in these qualities of the behavior. But if I just say, I would like the dog to look confident before you move on, you might decide that they do look confident, or I might decide they do not look confident. So being able, so those types of things you have to kind of judge for yourself. Or if you are in communication with someone else helping you with a project, then you need to be clear with what you are observing and what you're labeling as confident and enthusiastic and happy or fast, and things like that. So you can use those qualities of the behavior as a measure of success, but be careful because they are labels, right? Okay. Success is seeing more confidence. So that's funny. More confidence in my dog than we started in the session. We're working on teeter skills, so really easy to measure success right now. So that's exactly, it's so funny that you said that, and that's what I started talking about. So you have to define behaviorally what is confident. Okay. And you can define it for yourself, and you can be in charge of how to move on. But if you're working with someone, they need to know what you are looking for in confident. Excuse me. Oh God, I coughed. Go back to sleep, little puppy. Great. Okay. We can also, it goes a little bit back to rate of reinforcement, but we can also look at how many reps are you getting in a certain time period. So going back to that I only spend 6 to 10 treats on one behavior. Well, let's say that the 6 treats of the nose touches on day 1 took 40 seconds. Okay. But then the next day, those same 6 treats to get the same amount of nose touches took 70 seconds. So if there's going and the behavior hasn't changed, it's just a nose touch, right? That to me is not improvement. If it took him twice as long to earn the same number of cookies, something was wrong. So we can look at it that way a little bit too, because he still got all 6 cookies. So if we're only looking at the rate of reinforcement that he got all cookies, I might be tempted to progress him. But if we really look at the video and go, oh my gosh, he's twice as slow. The latency was twice as high from session 1 to session 2. What the hell? I know not to make it harder. In fact, I know to make it easier. Something like that. Okay. Does that make sense? How we measure success? Anything else there? Excellent. Okay. So when are we done? When are we done training a thing? When is it finished? When have we done everything we need to do for that behavior? I'm going to say probably never, because you get what you reinforce. So if you're training a behavior and you've been training it consistently for a while and you've been progressing it and you're adding distractions and you continue to train it and blah, 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 blah. And then it's like finished and it looks great and it looks great at home and it looks great at class and and you're thinking about competing. And it even looks good in competition. It looks great. You are thrilled. You've done such a fantastic job. You've had hardly any failures. You've just zoomed right up and it even looks great in competition. Well, guess what? It's not going to look great in competition forever without some maintenance involved. So you do have to, depending on the dog, regularly go back and put some money in the bank for those behaviors that you are using in competition environments, because you get what you reinforce. And at a competition, we're not directly reinforcing any of those behaviors. We're using up the money in the bank. So you do have to schedule in some maintenance training. So, but maintenance should include those easier and earlier training sessions. So when I'm maintaining a behavior, it doesn't mean that I need to practice the weave pulls and sequences. It doesn't mean that I have to practice my contacts and sequences. It just may mean that I need to do some entry work on 2 or 3 pulls, or some exit work on 2 or 3 pulls, or some end behavior work on a wobble board for my teeter contact. So maintenance doesn't mean doing the full competition behavior. It sometimes means breaking apart some of the components of that behavior and just working on those, because that's going to build up a more robust bank account. It's kind of like one behavior has several sub accounts in it, right? So like the weave pull might have an entry account, a weave all the poles account, and a following the handling of the exit account. But you can break those apart and add funds into them individually, and it makes the sum of the behavior more, right? Does that make sense? Rather than practicing the whole behavior in a sequence, you're dividing the one lump payment into the 3 accounts. That was yet another analogy on the fly. So let me know if I've completely lost the plot or if that makes sense. Excellent. Someone says they love it. I'm happy. That was my criteria for the night, is that someone liked what I have to say. Okay. I think that's what I have on my notes. So now I'm going to flip it over to you guys, ask your questions, try to keep it to this topic of progressing your training. Do you have questions about splitting versus lumping? Oh, that's a good question. How do you convince students of this, the maintenance phase? And maybe you just use that analogy. So think about, and maybe this is helpful to have these conversations with them, but it is a little bit like a bank account. When you are training, one cookie is one reinforcer is one thing. So if you're doing all 12 weave poles and you give the one reinforcer event at the end of the 12 weave poles, you've divided that one payment across the entire performance. Okay. Or I can say on, for the first 2 treats, so let's say I'm going to do 6 sets of weave poles. So I could do 6 full sets of weave poles for those 6 reward events. So I made 6 deposits. Those are all divided up. I don't know if they're divided up equally. I have no idea. It's not up to me because I just gave it for the one thing. I don't know where the dog put it in each of the sub accounts of the weave poles. Or I could spend however many reps on reinforcing an entry, and I know how much I'm putting into that sub account, and I could do a couple of reps for the exit, and I know that my dog is getting a direct deposit into that account, and then if I want to, I can do a couple of reps for the whole thing. But then I at least know where my money is going. If you just do the whole behavior, you don't actually know where the money is going. So maybe that's just how we convince them of it. And also, when I was teaching in-person classes, you don't always have to say why. You just do it. Like, this is the night we're going to work on this, and this is how you're going to work on it. This is what we're going to do. So you do have a little bit of that power as an instructor. When we worked on weave poles, if we were working on weave poles, I very rarely pulled out all 12. We would work on lower numbers. So if that's your lesson for the night, is to work on the weave poles, don't pull out 12. Have several stations of fewer poles. Same with the contacts. If you want them to work on specific pieces of the contacts, don't pull out the contacts. Pull out the props. Pull out the low teeter. Pull it out and have it low. Like, this is what we're doing tonight. Um, you do have a little bit of that power. So yeah, and then if they'll see the progress. That's usually the best way forward, is to set up the classes that will meet the needs. And then when the students see the progress, they will go, wait, what happened? What was different? Or, oh my gosh, last week's lesson was so valuable, yada yada. I'm already seeing X improvement. Excellent. Okay. What other questions do you have? About splitting, lumping, changing something, increasing anything, measuring success. Do you have questions about that? Do you have more questions about this maintenance phase and how we can do it? Who is the leader anyways? Well, I mean, it's kind of even been in the back of my head to do a series of talks about teaching agility, or just something, even if they're not these, just some general tips of teaching agility, because it's not easy. It's not for the faint of heart, but there is a lot of it's not dissimilar to the relationship you have with your four-legged learners, right? It is up to the agility instructor to provide the structure of the training session. And if that structure is clear and the expectations are clear, the learners will happily engage or they will leave. And that depends on you and how much you need that learner to stay around, will determine how much you'll change the environment for that learner. But if you've got 6 students in a class and 5 of them are like, oh my gosh, this is great, and the 6th one is like, I don't like it here, that's okay. It's okay if someone doesn't fit into your learning structure. I don't instruct agility, but what I do instruct, I plan it, not my students. Exactly. And it's the same with the dogs. The only thing that the learner gets to choose is the reinforcer, right? And then they also get to choose if they want to engage or not. And engaging has consequences, and not engaging has consequences. As a student, I love having someone make my training decision for me. We've talked about this. This is huge. The podcast that I just did with Sarah Stremming on CogDog Radio, we talked about this kind of probably for too long, about how that is a huge pro of taking a class, is that the instructor is in charge of telling you what to train. They're looking at the big picture going, okay, we need to do this. We need to do this. Oh, by the way, we haven't practiced contacts in a while and it's trial season. So they're all going to need to practice this. It's a thing. And it takes away some of that brain space of you having to come up with your own training plan. So it's a huge pro for the students to go to a class and have it be, we're going to do this, then you're going to do this, then you're going to do this. Now you're going to go home and you're going to do this. And then you're going to come back the next week and we're going to do this, this, this. You're going to go home and do this. So I think, and I've been there where it's like, oh, maybe I should just do this and kind of see what the students want to do. It might feel like it's like going back to that, I don't know. There's nothing wrong with agility instructors having structure and a set curriculum. I think students actually like it more. My experience was that students liked themes either for the night or like a few weeks. Like, so maybe a theme of the month, if it's a pretty heavy topic that you can dive into for 4, 5, 6 weeks in a row. I mean, obviously the FDSA model is a great model of that because we spend 6 intense weeks working on one skill or one set of skills, and we see huge amounts of progress with those working teams. So I think there's a lot to be gained, both as an instructor and a student, if there is more cohesive structure to the classes. I have a plan for progression of skills for them and their dogs, and that's the way it goes. Exactly. And you, the more experienced you are, you can say, okay, well, this dog is a little bit behind, or this dog needs this to be tweaked a little bit, and this team needs this to be tweaked a little bit. But you got to be the instructor for the reason. This conversation has completely 360 to another route, but it's a good one to have. Okay, get the dog to come down and put his feet at the end of the A-frame. He just likes to stand at the top and look around. So it's a little bit out of the edges of this topic, kind of like the teeter question before. So please post it in the group, but a lot of that is going to come down to reward placement and building value for the bottom, and trying to not letting the looking around behavior getting reinforced, and making it less valuable for him to go up there and look around, things like that. Yeah, I think a lot of people would, they need the structure of someone else making the training plans. And there's nothing wrong with that. I do think that the points you make about training your dog also have merit for an instructor training students. 100%. I know some people get rubbed the wrong way when we talk about training people the same way we talk about training dogs, but the science applies. It's a little bit more complex with humans because humans can tell narratives in their heads that dogs and other animals can't necessarily tell. But, think about it this way. If your students are signing up and paying for the class, they are motivated to take your class. So you don't have to really focus on motivating the students to be there. Like, you have to focus on motivating them to come back the next week. You have to focus on motivating them to do some homework this week, but you don't have to motivate them to be there. They already want to be there. And then looking at it from the perspective of they are also learning. So breaking things down into smaller bite-sized pieces for the human learner makes it easier for them to turn around and teach it to the four-legged learner. It's hard to do all the research to train, find the time to train. It was easier when I didn't have to think and create a plan. Absolutely. And this is why, like Sarah and I talked about in the podcast, why group classes are so popular is because the flexibility can be available for individuals who have that kind of 9-to-5 type job, because it's really difficult to do all of it. No arguments there, because if I have the same issue. It's like, it's a myth that all I do all day, or that the only thing that agility instructors do all day is train their own dogs. We don't. I kind of have the same thing. I have my set hours that I work, and then I have to squeeze my own training into that and my own training plans into that. The only overlap is that I do use my dogs as demo videos in my work. So they're getting trained, but it's not always what they need to be trained on. So that, I mean, so if I took time to train them for work, they're probably not also getting training for them. So I hear you. It's a lot to juggle. Job versus, so it's two separate things for me. My job as an agility instructor is completely different and separate from my hobby as an agility competitor who has her own dogs. Okay, we covered a lot of ground. Do you guys have more questions before we wrap this up? Okay. Before we go, I just want to remind everyone, because registration for the Finzi Dog Sports Academy December classes will open on Sunday before we get another face-to-face. So this December, I will be teaching a running A-frames class. Okay, so I'll put the link to it in the group, but registration will open on Sunday morning. So if you're interested in training a running A-frame with me, I really hope you'll consider signing up for that class. The gold spots, if you've never done a FDSA class before, the gold spots, it's 6 weeks of daily feedback, twice daily sometimes if you're on the ball with your training schedule and if your training schedule allows that. The silver spots, you get to ask questions about all the material and also submit 2 minutes worth of your training. And then the bronze level, you get access to everything. You can't ask questions about the material, but there usually is a Facebook study group where the students can help each other out. So again, that's going to open on Sunday. I'll put the link in the group. And if you have questions about the class, make sure you get them to me this week so that you are prepared for when registration opens. And if you think of questions later about this chat, just drop them in the group. I'm happy to answer them some other time. I'm glad that we got to discuss handlers as well. It's something I want to talk more about, so hold this space. We might talk a lot more about how to be kinder to our two-legged learners. So if you are an agility instructor or you want to tell your instructor to check things out, I think I might be doing some things for agility instructors really soon. It's time. Okay. Handling class is going to come back in February, I promise. I just finished typing up the description, so I want to go over it one more time this week, and then it'll be on the schedule for February. But I didn't think December was going to be all that great for a handling class, and February is already like a little bit sketchy for a lot of places. Okay. So thank you guys for joining me. It's always a pleasure. You always have great questions, and I really enjoy this time with you guys. See you next week.